The UK is rationing vegetables, and it's all about normalization. This is by Kit Knightley via offguardian.org on Zero Hedged by Tyler Durden. The past few days have seen certain fruits and vegetables rationed by major UK supermarkets. Aldi, Morrisons, Tesco, Sainsbury's all have put limits on customer purchases of peppers, tomatoes, and cucumbers. Just yesterday, Lidl added their own name to that list, many including Justin King, former Sainsbury's CEO, have jumped at the chance to lay the blame at Brexit's feet, but that does not make much sense since Morocco, whence the UK imports a lot of salad vegetables, obviously is not in the EU, in the European Union. Further, Ireland has been affected too. Plus, we're only 5 months removed from France and other EU nations facing their own catastrophic food shortages, quote unquote. The other side of Brexit divide is firmly set on blaming any shortages on the weather. Of course, that's also helpful to the establishment narrative, since the bad weather angle can be swiftly and easily parlayed into discussion about climate change. In fact, it already has been. Now, we have a tremendous amount of bad weather in the western part of Europe. Spain is under snow, which is very unusual. So obviously they have very inclement cold weather there. The article says the real reason there are shortages, supposing there are real shortages, not just nonsense like toilet paper fiasco at the beginning of the pandemic, is that one way or another they have been engineered, the writer says. The cost of producing, harvesting, transporting all crops has spiked because the cost of oil and gas was deliberately inflated. The cost of growing crops increased because there's a shortage of fertilizer, likewise created, and both of these are blamed on the war in Ukraine, but both the energy crisis and fertilizer crisis predate the war in Ukraine. Speaking of Ukraine, it's currently easier to get tomatoes in war-torn Kherson than in London, and that is really where we're being presented with. In short, the rationing is just another narrative that does not make internal sense. It's due to Brexit, but it isn't. It's due to the weather, but not everywhere. It's in some stores and not others, and apparently in some places, but not others, and apparently only affecting major supermarkets. According to one farmer, these supermarkets could make up the shortfall in imports by buying domestically grown produce, but are refusing to incur those costs. Further evidence that the food shortage narrative must be serving a purpose. Neil Oliver nailed it in his most recent monologue. He said, "They're rationing tomatoes in the supermarkets. We're told it's about supply chain, bad weather, and the price of heating. But right now, in terms of the messaging, I suppose that it's more about pushing the word rationing, less about believing shortage of food and more about getting us used to hearing the word. No doubt, if experience is anything to go by, the rest will come later. My money says a rationing app for our smartphones is already sitting on a hard drive somewhere, ready when we are. For now, it's more of a familiar process of psychological manipulation, get us acquainted with the general idea of food scarcity so that we're all primed when the planned reality is unrolled." So that's all it's about, and is carefully calculated, this writer claims, just as Roald Dahl is the first little taste of retroactive censorship, made acceptable by both his controversial legacy and the fact he wrote for children. This is the thin end of the rationing wedge. It's just tomatoes, after all, no hardship, is it? And yet the head of the UK Farmers Union said it would likely get worse, calling it the tip of the iceberg. He wasn't even making a lettuce pun, which is an awful wasted opportunity. And maybe we should all eat insects or lab-grown paste instead of importing vegetables. Am I right, he says. And this is on Zero Hedge by Kit Knightley via Off Guardian. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support. and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box